Hashem, we're together again after a sukkah of Yemei HaMoyed. This week's Parsha, Parshas Lech Lecho. And in Parshas Lech Lecho, at the end of the Parsha, we have one of the Asora Nesyonis and Esnasa Avraham Avinu. He was 99 years old when he was Makayim Mitzvas Milah. And Mitzvas Milah is one of the very few mitzvahs about which Chazal say, Shkulo keneged kol ha-Torah kulo. And Mila is Ois Bris Kodesh Shel Avraham Avinu. So there's a big discussion, how do we define Mitzvahs Mila? And today we will have a short little discussion about a machlokes between two of the greatest Gedolim in Lithuania, going back 150 years, the Beis HaLevi and the pre-Yitzchak. So, who knows? Probably everybody knows who was the Beis HaLevi. Who was the Beis HaLevi? Huh? Who was the son of the Beis HaLevi? What? He was the Beis HaLevi? His son. What was his father's name? Right. So, the Beis HaLevi was the father of Reb Chaim, grandfather of the Brisker Rav, and he was Rav in Brisk. Who knows who was the pre-Yitzchak? That's a tougher one. Who was the pre-Yitzchak? The pre-Yitzchak was Reb Peterburger. He was a friend of the Beis HaLevi, and he has an argument with the Beis HaLevi about Mitzvahs Mila. So let me tell you a story about Rabbi Peterburger. He was probably the greatest disciple of Rabbi Salant, and besides being an amazing Gadol B'Yisrael, as we see in his Shalosh Teshuvos, he was one of the founders of the Mussar movement. So there's a story I tell many times. It's more about Noshim Tzidkoneyos than about the life of a Gadol. He printed a sefer pre-Yitzchak, and his introduction, he explains what brought him to publish the sefer and what's behind the name of the sefer pre-Yitzchak. He had no children. So he writes, what I will leave over after Mea V'Esrim is only my Divrei Torah, and those will be the fruits of my toil, and that is why he named his sefer pre-Yitzchak. In his elderly years, his wife, his Rebbetzin, knowing that she is the one that can't have children, demanded a get. She couldn't live with the feeling that one of the greatest Gedolim of the time won't have any children because of her. So they had a wonderful relationship, but she demanded a get. And he said, no, I don't want to give you a get. I love you and you're my wife and you sacrificed so much for me. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to have children, we won't have children. So I'm sitting in a basin 20 years. I never had a case like this, in which the woman demands a get, even though it's her greatest chus to be the wife of the Gadol Ador, and he doesn't want to give a get. And obviously she was so insistent that he agreed to give her a get, and he asked her, what could I do for you to make you happy till the end of your life? And she asked him for a brocha, for arichas yomim, and she asked him to buy her a house in Eretz Yisrael. She wants to come live in Eretz Yisrael. He bought her a house in Eretz Yisrael, and she lived to be almost 100 years, and he remarried, and in his old age, he had children. In my shul, the davened a very chashuv person. He passed away about 10 years ago, Rav Mordechai Blazer, who was a grandson of Rabbi Tzela. Rabbi Tzela passed away more than 120 years ago, and it's amazing that his son's son, his grandson, davened in my shul. So he had a child in his very old age. So that's the story of the Rebbetzin, of the Pri Yitzchak. It's about his tzidkis, but it is even more about his wife. So, Zois Brisi, This is a ois bris kodesh ashme tishmeru beinu v'necha ben zarachu achrechu himmolochem kol zochor. This is a Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel. Hamal kol zman shu oisik b'milah choizer al tzitzin amakven samila and tzitzin amak v'zinem. Pirish einei choizer el al tzitzin amakven samila. What does this brayse talk about? Machloikes Rambam and Tur. The Tur says, this brayse talks about Shabbos. If you're Moel and Shabbos, and Milah is all about removing the orla, and the Moel removed most of the orla, no, finish your job. Mitzvahs Milah is removing the entirety of the orla. However, if he wrapped things up, he bandaged the baby, he put away his knife, and then he realizes, I left some of the orla. And b'di'evet he was yoitzer, you cannot do it again. So according to the Torah, that is a halacha of Shabbos. And the reasoning is, Milah doiche Shabbos. Milah doiche Shabbos lechatchila. But that is only as long as I'm still engaged in Milah. But once I finished my job, and it's a Milah kshera b'di'evet, taking the rest is just hidur mitzvah. Hidur mitzvah is not doiche Shabbos. The Rambam, surprisingly, when he brings this halacha in Hilchas Milah, he doesn't mention it talks about Shabbos. According to the Rambam, even in the middle of the week. If you, from your perspective, the moil, subjectively finished Masa Milah, you're not choiz on tzitzah ma'akveh. Why is that? The Beis HaLevi, we skip from number 2 to number 5. The Beis HaLevi says, what's the machloikes Rambam and Tur? The machloikes is, what is mitzvahs Milah? Is mitzvahs Milah the actual act of Milah and Priya, of cutting and removing the orla? Or is mitzvahs Milah the result of that act? Carrying ois bris kodesh al Avraham Avinu. Is mitzvahs Milah active or passive? In Lashon Kodesh, pa'il or savil? Is the actual removal of the orla considered as if hechshel mitzvah? And the mitzvah is lihiyois mohul? Or the mitzvah, like any other mitzvah that is an act, like shiluach haken, binyan hamaka, seifes chometz? The mitzvah is cutting and removing the orla, or the mitzvah is the result of that act. So the Tur holds the mitzvah is the result. And therefore, even when the moil wrapped things up, but the mitzvah is meskayim b'kol rega v'rega. And if the mitzvah is every moment of your life, then hidur mitzvah would be every moment of your life. And that is why in the middle of the week, of course, finish your job. The Rambam's shitta is, mitzvahs Milah is cutting and removing. Once you've finished your job, you finish the mitzvah, and there is no hidur mitzvah after you yoytze the mitzvah. So that is the explanation of the Beis HaLevi. What is the machlokes Rambam and the Tur? And this brings us to source number 3. Tanu Rabbanon, Negamoran Menoches, Chaviv and Yesol, Shesibavan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mitzvahs. Tfilim Beroshayim, Tfilim Bezoyasayim, Tzitzis V'Ogdeim, Umezuzi Lepeschein V'Aleim Omedomet Sheva B'Yoim, Helal Tichuan Mishpetei Tzedkach. 7 mitzvahs, and that is Sheva B'Yoim Halal Ticho. What are the 7? 4 tzitzis, 2 tefillin, 2 plus 4 is 6, and mezuzah, 7 mitzvahs. And of those 7 mitzvahs, David HaMelech says, Sheva b'yoyim alal ticho. ובשעה שנכנס דוד לבייס המחץ, ורואה עצמו עומד ערום, אומר, אוי לי, שעמד ערום בלוי מצווס. David was in Beis HaMerchetz, he went to the mikveh, and suddenly he felt, I have no tefillin, I have no tzitzis. On the doorpost there is no mezuzah, because in a Beis HaMerchetz you put no mezuzah. And he says, Oy, ani orem min ha-mitzvahs. Niska b'milasoi, v'neskar rodatoi. And that is Lamenatseach Alashmines. Number 8 is Mila. Let's have a look, a short paragraph in Minchas Osher, source number 4. כבר הריחו האחרונים במצוות מילה הם יקרו בעצם המייסה, החיתוך והפריאה, או בתצורס המייסה, שיהיה מהול וחוסן בעצמס קודש. וכבר מילו סיימו רודה, באמס מצינו בזה ג' דרכי אבון, and not 2 but 3. Number 1, מייסה מילה, the way the Beis Halevi understands the Rambam. You, him Elohim kol zochar, do it, and that is the mitzvah. Number 2, Teitzuras HaMaisa, Shiyeh Mahul V'chosum. That is the Beis Halevi's understanding in the Tur. And I say number 3, Shelo Yihye Orel. So, Ba'omek HaDvorim, we could interpret and understand Mitzvahs Mila in 2 ways. Would Mila be like Seifes Chometz? You're not allowed to have Chometz. This is bad, get rid of it. Getting rid of the Orla. Or maybe there's something positive and not only negative in this mitzvah. It is not only about what I won't have from now to eternity, it is about what I will have. And Ois Bris Kodesh of Avraham Avinu is something positive. It is a sign. It is a Eidus. So, just to draw a comparison, would Mitzvahs Mila be similar to Seifes Chometz? Chometz is bad on Pesach. You can't have Chometz, get rid of it, get rid of the Orla. Or would it be like Asiyas HaMaka? Asiyas HaMaka and Seifes Chometz are both about the result, not about the actual act. But it's a different type of result. Seifes Chometz is about, it's a negative result. I don't have Chometz. Maika is a positive result. I do have a Maika. So I think Bedakas Owinyan, it's a nuance, but I do see 2 different interpretations of Mitzvahs Mila. Assuming that Mitzvahs Mila is about the result, what is the nature of that result? Is it a negative nature like Seifes Chometz? The Orla is Ma'us. Or is it a positive result? Like building a Maika, and I will have that Maika lenetzach. Or maybe a better comparison. Tzitzis, according to the Manda Omar Choyves Tales, Klei Kufse Chayovim Betzitzis. Your beged must have tzitzis. According to the Manda Omar Klei Kufse Chayovim Betzitzis, even though you're not wearing that beged, what is the mitzvah? Tying the tzitzis? Probably not. The mitzvah is your beged should have tzitzis. In a similar way, your body should have ois bris kodesh. So I think there are 3 different interpretations. The most simple one is do it. Cut, remove. Maisa mitzvah. Number 2 would be the result, but the negative result. I don't have chometz, I don't have a orla. Number 3, maybe a positive result. My beged has tzitzis. My body has ois bris kodesh. So we explained the Beis Halevi. Now we go over to the Itzele. Ateret sholem v'brocha l'chvoid harav hagon hagodel ma'or hagoyle kvoid kiddush Hashem tefartoi Yosef Dov Ber Gaivet Slutsk. He was the Rav in Slutsk before he became the Rav in Brisk. After Slutsk, he came to Brisk. The Rav in Slutsk was Reb Shilei Diskin. He was in Brisk before the Beis Halevi, and he was in Slutsk before the Beis Halevi. Achar mavoi drisha sholom kemishpat. Higiyani mechtovei ator im sifroi aboher shal shuvas Beis Halevi chelik sheni. So the Beis Halevi sent a gift to his friend Rabbi Tzela Peterburger, Sefer Beis Halevi, and Rabbi Tzela responds. Does anybody know what hadrag means? First word in the second paragraph. What is hadrag? Is that one of the Shemus HaKadoshim? What is hadrag? Hadrag Geono. That's one of the very common titles in Sforim. How that's going to hoyel Ba'er, machlokes Rambam v'Tur le'inyan Mila b'chol, em choizal tzitzin she'em yakven. And he brings the Beis HaLevi's explanation. And he wants to bring a raya to the Beis HaLevi. Va'al chakira zu, ro'isi la'oirer be'ezes Hashem yisborach. Hine le'choyre nela nizat elai v'raya brura, the mitzvahs Mila nemshechas li'olam. V'tomed u'mekayim mitzvah b'mashu unimoil. The mitzvah is not only the act, but the result. The hinay b'menoches mem gimel ma'isa braisa chaviv in yisol shesim el HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'mitzvahs. U'b'shosh shenechnas David HaMelech Beis HaMerchetz. So the Bitzela asks, L'cha'oire b'manis yashvu dato. Your mitzvah says, Shamila k'vanis kayim b'zmano. V'avakashah mitzvah shekiyim b'zmano avor. V'adayin achshav olam min ha-mitzvahs. So David HaMelech suddenly remembers, oh, I'm circumcised, so I'm okay. But his father circumcised him 50 years ago. Why didn't he remember, this morning I said Krishma. This morning I had tefillin. I said Berchas HaMozen after I ate breakfast this morning. Why does he need to remember something that happened 50 years ago and his father did? So obviously the only explanation is mitzvahs Mila is now. It's not then. So the Rebbe wants to prove the mitzvah of Mila is not only the actual act, but it is a mitzvah nimsheches. Every moment of your life, when you're mohul, that is the mitzvah. But then he asks, so I have a problem with the reisha of this same Mamer Chazal. How do Chazal explain Sheva b'yoim halal tichu? Chaviv in yisol shesibavan HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'mitzvahs. What are the 7? 4 tzitzis, 2 tefillin mezuzah. And what about Mila? What about Mila? So this Gemara proves Mila is then. Tefillin, tzitzis, mezuzah is now. So it's very unreasonable that in this short Gemara, and Chazal seem to stick these 2 mamorim one to the other, how would they contradict one another? If David HaMelech said 7, 7 is not 8. So why is Mila different than tzitzis, tefillin, mezuzah? So this l'chayra would prove tzitzis, tefillin, mezuzah is now, Mila is then. If Mila is then why was David HaMelech so happy when he remembered that he has a bris? It is about then. So, the conclusion of the Pri Yitzchak is different than the Beis HaLevi. And what the Pri Yitzchak says, there are mitzvahs that are eidus, mitzvahs that testify we are Avdei Hashem. And the uniqueness of tefillin, tzitzis, mezuzah is testimony. We are Avdei Hashem. We are here to serve. We are servants. We are Kodesh Baruch Hu servants and slaves. Mezuzah and tefillin is the parsha of Kriyas Shema. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad v'yohavto. Kabbalas ol Malchus Shamayim and Kabbalas ol Mitzvahs. Tzitzis, that very same daf, Menoches Mem Gimel, the Gemara says tzitzis is choisim shel tit. Tosis explains that is the symbol of Avdus. Tzitzis reminds us every moment, Taryag mitzvahs shebetoira. So these mitzvahs testify that we are Avdei Hashem. So according to the Pri Yitzchak, it's not about now or then. That's not the issue, now or then. Sibavan HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'mitzvahs are 3 mitzvahs. 3 that number 7 that testify we are Avdei Hashem. And that is unique about tefillin, tzitzis, mezuzah. That doesn't include Mila. So on one hand he says, Mila is a mitzvah nemsheches. And that is why David was gratified. Masha Enken, the other 3 mitzvahs. However, the Pri Yitzchak feels that the Ikar mitzvahs Mila is not only that I don't have an orla, but that I do have something that is with me. So there are three different interpretations in Mitzvahs Milah. However, we go back to the Minchas Osher. Hanera ikar bezela anius daiti. De'ein yoid soida dvoram kamo damashma medivrei beis Halevi ukavonas apri yisod bedvoram diyesh b'ze shtei mitzvahs. Lamol sheyeh mohul. In my opinion, and in my forum, this is a very common idea. Maisa ha-mitzvah and mahus ha-mitzvah. The actual act of the mitzvah and the essence of the mitzvah are not always the same. The mitzvah certainly is chituch and priya. And on chituch and priya we say the brocha, shekadishonu b'mitzvos etzvon ala Mila. But the mahus of the mitzvah is the result. As if a Kodesh Baruch Hu says, Malu shetehiyu nimolim. So the Beis Halevi emphasizes Pasuk Gimel. We go back to the top of the page. Zois bris asher tishmu beini v'nechem en zechor, himmoy lochem kol zochor, v'nimaltem es mesaro laschem, ben shemone shumem yimal kol zochor, himmoy yirid bais mikesef, v'hoisu brisi b'vsarchem lebrit olam. The Beis Halevi says, these last 5 words, that is the mitzvah. V'hoisu brisi b'vsarchem lebrit olam. The result. And I say no. V'hoisu brisa v'sarim is the rationale. It is the essence. But the mitzvah is himoil lochem kol zohar. And there are so many different examples. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah. What is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? Rav Salant in Or Yisrael, Shulchan Aruch Harav and Hilchos Talmud Torah say there are 2 different mitzvahs, Talmud Torah and Yedias HaTorah. And I say, there's only one mitzvah. But the essence of mitzvahs Talmud Torah is Lilmod al menat la'asot. Talmud Godel Shemei v'lidei ma'aseh. Learn that you shall know. The mitzvah is definitely learning. So 2 people. One is slow. He learns 10 hours a day. And throughout this man, he mastered 5 daf. His friend is extremely talented. He learns 1 hour a day. And he mastered 50 daf. So Mr. Aleph learned far more than Mr. Beis. Mr. Beis knows far more than Mr. Aleph, who has a greater mitzvah. If we say the mitzvah is Yedias HaTorah, then the one that has more knowledge, knows more Torah, has a greater mitzvah. To me, that is an awful mistake. No. He knows more. Kodesh Baruch Hu gave him more talent, a brighter mind. But the one that learned more has a greater mitzvah. Mitzvah's Talmud Torah is learn. The essence of the mitzvah is learn that you shall know. There's an amazing Taz in Even Ezer, Siman Chof Aleph. And the Taz says an interesting pshat and a posik. The Taz is one of the greatest poskim, but obviously he was a darshan as well. And the Taz says, some people, some yeshiva boys, are up very late at night. They don't sleep enough. And they're learning constantly, but they're so tired when they learn, they don't retain much. Others would learn an hour or 2 less, have a good night's of sleep. You'll learn with more clarity, and you will retain more. The Taz says, better learn less to know more. Shav lochem mashkim ekum ma'achrei shoves. Kein yiten liyadidoi sheino. The Taz says an interesting pshat. Chaval that you're up early in the morning and you're up late by night. No, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mefargen lecha lishon tov. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to have a good night of sleep. Sleep 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, as much as you feel you need. Learn less hours with more clarity of mind. So does this taz contradict what I just said? No. The mitzvah is to learn. But the mitzvah is to learn in a way and in a style that you will know Torah. Because ultimately the mitzvah is to learn. But the rationale of the mitzvah is learn because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to know. It's a derech neilech bo ve'et ha'maaseh asher ya'asun. And the ikar mitzvah is nilmed al menat la'asot. And I say, just like by Talmud Torah, the mitzvah is learn. The essence of the mitzvah is the result of learning. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to know Torah. The same goes to Mitzvahs Mila. The mitzvah is chituch v'priya. This is what you should do. Why is it important to do this? So, unlike what's mashma and pri Yitzchak, there are two different mitzvahs. No, there are no two different mitzvahs by Mila. And unlike the Beis Halevi, that the mitzvah is primarily the result, and the chituch and priya are somewhat like a hechsher mitzvah. No, the mitzvah is only the ma'isa, but the essence of the mitzvah is the result. Moilu kedei shetehiyu nimulim, kedei shetehiyu chasumim ba'ois bris kodesh. So my understanding is like somewhat of a pshora, a compromise between the various different understandings that we learn in Mitzvahs Mila. So what is the Machlokes Rambam and Tur? That will need to wait for another opportunity, maybe when we will discuss the inyan of Hidur Mitzvah. So this week we learn about the Asora Nisyonis Shenesnasa Avraham Avinu. So last week was a great week, Baruch Hashem, but for me it was also a profoundly sad week because I had various different Nichum Avelems last week. I visited the family of one soldier that was killed and left 8 Yesoimim, another one that was killed and left 5 Yesoimim. Both were great people. One of them, on the way up to Lebanon, did a tefillah in the Kinneret. He said if Chas v'Sholom something happens to him, he wants to go up to the heavens b'tahara. And he also visited a family, was not a soldier. Not only soldiers die. And every death is a tragedy in the same way. Talmid Chacham that passed away at a young age. And a few times I shared a feeling. Avraham Avinu was the first man in the world to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, to Avraham Avinu wasn't much of a chiddush. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made his wife. He had no other option. You know, he had a personal relationship. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was like his father. He opened his eyes and he said, "Hi, where am I? What am I doing here? Well, what is this?" And he sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu that created him. Avraham Avinu was the first to recognize Elokei Yisrael. And when he recognized HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he felt a responsibility. The Rambam so beautifully describes at the beginning of Hilchas Avodas Kechovim how the world went midechi al dechi, from one low to a greater low. And they were all over the Avodah Zorah. Ad she'omad eisen zeh v'nikbetzu elav halofim v'ravoves v'shosel belibam. It's the ikar hagadol of emunas hayichod. He taught the world Torah. Avraham Avinu kiyam kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno. In a way, with Ruach HaKodesh, he performed all the mitzvahs, ad shelo nitno. We would expect Avraham Avinu to have a utopian life of brocha and hatzlocha and shefa. We would expect the Kodesh Baruch Hu to give him a life of wealth, of good health, of nachas. He deserved it, no doubt, but it was not to be. Asora Nisyonis Nisnas Avraham Avinu. We don't understand the Kodesh Baruch Hu's ways, but sometimes, et asher yohav Hashem yochiach. And as she writes in Kapitel Yud Aleph and Tehillim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu never will test a person unless the Kodesh Baruch Hu knows that he has the koyach to withstand those tests, to be oimed bin asoyin, otherwise he wouldn't be tested. That's what Rashi writes in Tehillim. So sometimes the Kodesh Baruch Hu tests the greatest. Avraham Avinu was the greatest Ohev Hashem. That's what the Rambam writes in Perek Yud of Hilchos Tshuva. Yeshayahu Hanavi, when he turns to the Jewish people, he calls them Zera Avraham Ohavi. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the greatest Ohev Hashem, we must assume Midah Keneged Midah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved him more than anyone else, because he loved HaKadosh Baruch Hu more than anyone else. And he had a tough life, a difficult life. One Asoyin and another and another and another. Sora Nisyonis Nasa Avraham Avinu v'Ovad B'Kulam. So why was Avraham Avinu tested again and again? For all the future generations of Klal Yisrael. And all the koyach of Mesiras Nefesh any Jew has throughout the ages comes from Avraham Avinu. The Balaturim writes, "V'yohavto es Hashem Elokecho b'chol avavcho b'chol nafshecho b'chol moedecho b'chol nafshecho es afilu noitel es nafshecho." How do we have that koyach? The Balaturim writes, "V'ohavto," same letters as ha'avois. It is from the Ovis Ekdoshim that we have that koyach. Many times I explained the Gemara in Gittin Daf Nun Vav. Gittin Daf Nun Vav is a famous story about a Jewish mother. The Gemara doesn't say what her name was, but it is in the Midrashim. A Jewish mother, her 7 children were murdered one after the other because they all refused l'shtachavois l'tzelem in the days of Chorban Beis HaMikdash. And each of those children, when he was required to bow down to Avodah Zarah, each of them quoted the posuk of Avas Hashem and of Mesiras Nefesh. And before her youngest child is to be slaughtered, she kisses him and she tells him, when you go up to the heavens, Lech v'omar tu l'Avraham Avinu, ato akadato mizbeach echad, v'ani akadati shiva mizbechois. I guess not everybody could go into Avraham Avinu up there in Gan Eden. Probably there's a hoisbochen and a gabbai and another and a secretary, and you want to go into the Rav. They'll ask you, what do you want? I mean, maybe you could talk to the secretary, send an email. Not everybody has access to Avraham Avinu. But every Yid that is moise nefesh al kedushas Hashem, no one would dare to stop him. So the mother tells her little child, go up there and look for Avraham Avinu and tell him, Atu akadatu mezbeach echad v'ani akadati shiva mezbechois. What does she mean to say? Don't think you're so great. You did it once and I did it 7 times. That's strange. If that is what she meant, why would Chazal tell us? If what she meant is wrong, who could judge a mother that sees all her 7 children killed before her eyes? But if she said something bad, why would Chazal tell it? Maybe many more things were said there. Chazal is not a storybook. If Chazal say, this is what she said, then it must be a positive saying. My understanding is, she says, please go find Avraham Avinu and say, thank you, Avraham, thank you. You were oiked wa mizbeach, but in your merit and in your schus, I was oimed min asoyin for shiva mizbechois. Avraham Avinu had 1 akedah, and in his koyach, Klal Yisrael sacrificed hundreds and thousands of akedas. And it is all v'yohavto, the koyach of Oves HaKadosh. And that is why Avraham Avinu was tested in the entire spectrum of the human experience. One test was Golus, the beginning of this week's parasha, Lech Lacha. Ma'artzacho, memaladetecho, umebeis avicho. my understanding is this. By human nature, there are different circles that a person feels attached to, loves, loyalty. The most closest is family. His wife, his children, siblings, parents. Those are the ones we love the most and feel the closest to. Number two is your social circle. Your friends, guys that sit with you in yeshiva and kollel, the workplace, your neighbors, people you grew up with, people that daven in your shtibel. That is number two. That is what the Torah calls moledes. In modern Hebrew, moledet is your homeland. But in Lashon HaTorah, moledes is where you were born, your social circle. And number three is your country. People have some fundamental loyalty to their country. Hundreds of millions of people in history died for their nation. Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu, Lech lechu ma'artzecho. Leave your land, not only your land. Memeladetecho. Say goodbye to your friends. And you're leaving your family as well, Mabeis Avicho. And Avraham says, where am I going? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go. You'll find your way as you go. I will show you. You don't need to know where you're going. And that is an Nisayan. And Avraham packs up. He leaves. He leaves his country, he leaves his neighbors, he leaves his family, and he doesn't even know where he's going. The other Nisayan is war. Malchemes Arba Malachim. Famine. Tzara de Gufo. An old person, 99 years old, and he does Mila. Ur Kazdem. He gives his life, and the ultimate test is Kachnu es bincho es yechidcho asher ohavto v'elei sham liyoilo. Far more easy to give away your life than to kill your son with your own hands. Va'omad bekulam. So whatever nisoyin we can have through the ages is koicho shel Avraham Avinu. I heard a story, and I must share this story. I heard it mikli sheni, not from the moyel, but a person that heard it from the moyel. So today's shiur was about Mitzvas Mila. So this is a Mesiras Nefesh story about Mila. Before the Iron Curtain was torn to shreds, in communist Russia and Eastern Europe, it was a grave crime to do Mitzvahs Mila. And if you were caught, you were sent to Siberia for 20 years. And they were Mo'alem b'Mesiras Nefesh. That were Machnes Yaldi Esol Abrisa Shel Avraham Avinu. Most of them were Lubavitcher Hasidim in Russia. And the Moil used to visit the town once in a few weeks. So it was almost impossible to have Mila Bismano. And there was an underground network, and people were notified when the Moil will come to town. And there was a list of babies, and he went from one home to the other to do Mila. And the Moil told a story. I come into a home, and the tension was so tangible. I walked into the house, and I felt extreme tension. I didn't know what it's about. I circumcised the child, and even before I could bandage him and wrap it up, the mother snatched the child away from me, and she started kissing him like a crazy woman, as if she was deranged. And after a few moments, she gave me back the baby, and she explained, I have an argument with my husband. We're not frum. And my husband said, why go through this? I don't want to go to jail. You're crazy. You're insane. Why is this so important? Do you want to go to jail? Do you want to send me to jail? And he was against doing Mila. And she insisted, we're Jewish. This is what our forefathers did for thousands of years, and we're going to do it. And her husband was against it. So she swore to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm not going to kiss my baby as long as he is not circumcised. Just to be sure that this is what she'll do. And the baby was almost 2 months old. So the moment the Moel walked into the house, the tension just built up. And the moment he was mohur, circumcised, she snatched away the baby and kissed him frantically. So I didn't think anybody ever did statistics. How many times does a mother kiss a baby in the first 2 months of his life? I looked for it, but I found no statistics. But I don't know how much time that mom kissed her baby after he was mohur, but she needed to make up for 2 months. That is just an example of Mesirus Nefesh, of simple people. They weren't frum. But in every Yiddish heart, there's always that spark that always lives on. And that Mesirus Nefesh comes from Avraham Avinu. In his Asora Nisyonis, Shenisnas Avraham Avinu, V'omad B'kulam. So whatever Mesirus Nefesh we have, we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we thank the Avos HaKadoshim. So when we learn Masa Avois, we daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Beglal Avois, Toshia Bonim, V'sovi Ge'ulo, Levnei V'neim, and Schus Avos, we should be Zoicha B'korov, to see Yeshua's Yisrael and Bias Moshiach Tzedkeinu B'mheru V'yomeinu Amen. Did I